Hey everybody, welcome back. Dave Forrest here. Now we're on to the next phase of the Brummbar. So I've done a few things since the last video, and I'll walk you through, and then we'll look at replicating those on the other side of the vehicle that hasn't had those effects done. So first and foremost, what I've done is I've used dry transfers for the numbers here. So if you remember, I did one of the marking options out of the box, and I didn't want to use the Tamiya decals, or I didn't want to risk using them, because sometimes I find that the carrier film can be fairly thick, and I've had experience in the past, and maybe it's me, maybe it's operator error, but I've had experience in the past where I just couldn't get the carrier film to sink into the surrounding detail successfully, and with all of the wonderful surface texture that you have here, the cast texture that you have on the sides, I thought that might be a little bit problematic. So I said, hey, let's try some dry transfers. So I put these on. These are from the Adam Wilder range of dry transfers, and I think they turned out pretty. I think they turned out pretty good. The problem with dry transfers, though, is that once they're on, they're on. You can't get them off without resorting to some fairly destructive means. So getting them lined up properly on the vehicle before you press them in is absolutely key. So we're going to do that. So I'll show you how I did that on the other. I'll show you how to do that on the other side here, and then I seal them with a mixture of Tamiya semi gloss, which is X35, and flat clear, which is XF86, about a 50-50 mix. And the reason for that is that the mission model paints that we've been using here, I've been using here, have a bit of an eggshell finish. So I didn't want to coat them. Normally I would just coat them in a dead flat, but because I didn't want to have a drastically different finish from the rest of the vehicle, which I'm not touching with, or I'm not going to overspray, not at this point anyways. I wanted to keep that finish in sync with everything else. So about a 50-50 mix with these two, and about probably 60%. So if I have to go to the mixing ratio, probably 30% semi-gloss, 30% flat, and maybe 40% thinner. And I use the X20 thinner, so we'll do that after to seal them. And then I applied some of the streaking, similar to what we did for the Sherman, where just kind of run it down and then work it in with a slightly moistened brush, just to get some effects here. And you can see, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit later in the video when we have the light on it. You can see there's some nice variations in the tones where I used. I like the rainmark effects from MIG, so I use that. The same, we use that or I've used that in other vehicles, not on the Sherman. I used, oops, I have the right one here, and I used AK streaking grime for dark yellow vehicles. So again, whether it's AK or MIG, they make the same type of color. And then I also worked in darker brown with this is 502 Optong Shadow Brown. So I used that as well, just straight on, and just kind of worked it in. So I'll show you how to do that on the other side as well. It's a little bit different than we did last time. But before we did any of that, so the last video we did, I was working in the camouflage and modulating the camouflage, and then I gave everything a hit with this filter. So this is from the Adam Wilder range of filters. This is ochre yellow, or bright ochre filter for Panzer yellow. This is from their Nitro line NL11, and I just coated the whole vehicle with it. I used it everywhere, and some panels I would go over and add a second coat on it just to give it a bit of a variation, and it really kind of did a really nice job of enriching the Panzer yellow I was using, the mix that I had, and also enriching the green and the red-brown tones as well. So I think it did a really, really nice job. So I think for all things in that German tritone scheme, I think the bright ochre filter is going to be a go-to for me going forward. So I was real happy the way that worked out. So I applied it, very light coats, again, similar to what we did on the Sherman. Where you're taking most of you're getting your brush in, you're trying to get most of the filter off, you're wiping it on on a piece of paper just to draw even more off, so the brush is barely wet, and you're putting it on in a controlled fashion, not letting it pool and whatnot on the vehicle. And then I did some pin washes. So there's a lot of really nice bolt detail on the top of the Brummbar here, as you can see, and just worked it in. And I use my trusty MIG dark wash here. I find it's a little bit thick out of the bottle, so what I'll do is I'll thin it with some of the odorless thinners, probably 50-50, I would say. And I'll just use a nice little kind of tin. So I'll just, with a brush, just put some of the wash in, add a few drops of the thinner, and I just find it flows a little bit easier. And then I'll let it dry, and then go back with a moist brush, moistened with odorless thinners, just to clean it up a bit. So I did the top of the vehicle here. I haven't done this side or the back or whatnot, so I'll do a little bit on camera, and then I'll finish the rest off camera, because people have seen that before. And then I also did so I put the tracks on. So if you remember last time I was talking about these Kaizen tracks, and they're beautiful. Real happy with them. They're a little bit tedious to clean up, because there's, on the sprue there's 5 connection points, so you got to spend a little time cleaning them up. And I was worried about having to, I think I mentioned this last time, I was worried about having to like drill or re-drill the holes, but they were fine. I didn't have to do any of that. They supply the wire in, so it's just a matter of putting the wire in to connect them, snipping it off, and then I just fix the ends with a little bit of Tamiya cement, the thin cement, just to to melt the plastic a little bit so it holds onto the wire so it doesn't come out. So I've got both runs done, and you can see under the vehicle here there's a longer pin here, and there's another one up here that I can use. So if I need to pull it off the vehicle, I can just pull these pins out, or these longer lengths of wire out. These can come off, and then I can paint them off the vehicle, and then put them back on them when that happens. So we'll show that in a later episode. But you can see they're very nicely done. You can get a nice natural sag in with them, and again, they're not heavy like frill tracks with these, so they're not going to play havoc with your suspension. Not that I've had that with too many vehicles in the past, but I think maybe with some of the larger tracks for like King Tigers and whatnot, or Panthers, that could come into play. But real easy to work with. Can't wait to see what they look like when they're all painted up and weathered and muddied up and all of that. So, so I think we'll. I don't know if there's anything else that I did to it off camera. I think that's about it. So I just applied a bit of a wash here on the vehicles. I decided to add and this was a great suggestion from Dave, just add a point of interest of just doing one of the steel road wheels in a red primer. So it's the same color as what we use for under the vehicle here, just to give it a point of interest. And that's the only one I would do on the vehicle. I wouldn't do any others. So keep that just to give it a little bit of variation. And then we're also going to hang some skirts off, but we'll do that in a separate video. But I think now what we'll do is we'll get to this side of the vehicle. We'll put on the dry transfer. I'll show you how to line that up and put that on and apply it, and how to nudge any corrections if that's required. And then we'll seal it, and then we'll get to doing some streaking and weathering. But again, very, very similar to what we did on the Sherman together. Okay, so now we're going to look at lining up the dry transfer. So again, these are the ones I used. So they're from Adam Wilder. So he has a range of he does the Balkenkreuz as well, which is the German cross. But there's also a range of numerals, and what you can do with these numerals is you can get them at such a point where. So I just got the white outline, but you can also get the red one as well. So you can, with the combination of the two, you can get kind of the red numerals with the white outlines. In our case here, we're just interested in the white outlines. And here's what they kind of look like. So they come in this little plastic Ziploc bag here, and you've got the film. Now I was lucky in that because I was using 222. They give you a bunch of different numbers, and there was a row of 6 of them here lined up. So all I had to do, so everything was already lined up perfectly. So all I did is I just sort of cut them out, so I didn't have to worry about lining up the individual numbers. So if I was doing something like 2, 3, 4, I'd have to cut out a 2, and then cut out a 3, and then cut out a 4, and then line them up. So it was kind of a happy accident that this was a 222 that we wanted. So it worked out perfectly. I just kind of cut them out. And you can see similar to what I had here. So the numbers are already aligned and spaced. So I used the spacing. I didn't want to bring them closer together or further apart. And when you cut them out, what I did is I have a little cutting mat that I use for doing precise work that doesn't, my other cutting mats on my workbench have all kinds of paint and glue and stuff on them. So I keep this one here just for doing this type of fine work. And so I cut out, and then you can see there's, the important thing to know about dry transfers is that you have a carrier film, and you have a backing, which is like a wax paper backing. So it's important to keep that wax paper backing on, because as soon as you apply the slightest bit of pressure to these things, that kind of activates the adhesive. So if it's on the wax backing, you're okay, nothing's going to happen. But if, let's say, for example, if I didn't have this wax backing on here and I tape this on and I press onto it, that's going to activate the adhesive, and I'm going to get numbers stuck to my cutting pad here, which you don't want. So when you cut this out, make sure you keep the wax backing on the back of it, because that prevents any transfer of the pressure-sensitive adhesive to whatever surface you're cutting on. And then what I do is, so again, you can see, so I've just used some Tamiya tape here. So what I do, now if I had 3 different numbers, you'd work kind of the alignment on the sheet here, or on the cutting pad. And then what I do is I fix, now I'm lucky here, everything's in one cut, so I don't have to worry about it. So I just make sure that my cutting paper, or the film, and then the wax paper backing are aligned, and then I'll just tape just along the bottom here to line it up. No, that wasn't a very good. Now I don't have a lot of. Now when I remove this from the film, I didn't give myself a lot of room to work with here. So maybe what I'll do is I'll line that up to one of these. So the nice thing about using a cutting pad that has a grid on it is you have a bit of a reference. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to line the bottom of the numbers up on that green line here, because the cut I made here isn't straight. Of course it's not straight. And then I just apply this tape on the bottom of it. And again, trying to get the tape to line up just under the numbers. So there you go. See, well, let me pull that one off, just so that it just touches. Just there you go. So now, what we want to do is pull this. No, that doesn't work out very well. Let's try that again. So this is a bit of a tedious process. So there is some investment of effort in here, but believe me, better to deal with this now while the number is off the vehicle and safe, as opposed to on the vehicle. Because as soon as you position this on the vehicle, you're going to want to remove that backing paper so that you can start dealing with transferring it. There we go. So I think we're good. Let's see how that works. Maybe peel it up from the bottom here. There we go. Now you can position it on the vehicle. So when you're dealing with putting numbers on either side, putting it on the first side is the easier part, because that sets the standard for putting it on the other side. So now what I have to do is figure out, okay, where exactly did I line this up with respect to you know, these pistol ports here, you know, how far down from, you know, the slope roof here. And the problem with this is that, you know, this is straight, but this kind of slopes down. So what I did is I kind of put, started the second two just above this ridge here, and I kind of lined them up, just kind of to line up with the bottom of this pistol port here. So that gives me a bit of a guide. So I'm going to try and set that up on the other side here. Now the good news is that because they're on opposite sides, unless they're really, really off, chances are people aren't going to notice, but you're probably better off to try and keep them in alignment as much as possible so that you avoid any of this. So, oops, we don't want that to happen. So we definitely want this paper on the back here. Just as a safety measure, right? Just until I get this position on the vehicle properly, so that if I do accidentally press on any of the numbers or whatnot, then I'm not starting the transfer process ahead of when I want to. I'll just grab it like that. So again, just using kind of the guide. Probably, oh, that's going to work. So you can see this is a bit of a tedious exercise, but now the good thing we have about this vehicle is you've got these nice support rails here for the side skirts. Now this is straight, and it acts as a cue for the eye. So I can use, I've got a nice small straight edge here. I can sit this on top of those triangles and just rotate this up, and this will tell me if my number is straight. So you can see here, that looks pretty good. So that looks like, and you know, the looks a little bit crooked because the backing paper is out of skew on the back, but if I look at it with respect to the vehicle, I think that looks pretty good. What do you think, Robert? I think that looks good.
Yeah, it's good.
So I think it's just a matter now of seeing if, you know, if I look at this from the top, are the numbers lined up? And I think they, okay, so I looks like we're good. So I had Robert double check my eye, but I think, so I haven't, you know, off camera, I haven't, honest to goodness, I haven't taken this off and repositioned. So I think we got real lucky. So it's straight there. It's lined up with the bottom of this pistol port here. If I use, and this is Robert's idea, so I got to give him full credit for this. If I put my ruler here against the start of this support band, and I look down on it, it just, you know, so that the edge of this here just kind of lines up with the start of that first two from the front, and then the same thing on this side here with that, the end of that first two from the front. So from, in terms of the, you know, the alignment here, it's good. I'd say the horizontal alignment is good. I would say the vertical alignment is good based on what we're seeing here. Again, it just, you know, just touches the bottom of this thing here. It looks a little crooked to the eye because of this backing paper, but if I pull this out, you know, I think that looks pretty good. I really do. I think that looks pretty good. And if I measure this, the other cue I have here is from the edge of the second pistol port. That's about a quarter of an inch, or just a hair under a quarter. Now if I measure on this side, it's about a hair under a quarter. Maybe a 32nd of an inch off, but you know what? For the sake of pulling it off and moving, I'm not gonna tempt fate. I'm not gonna muck with it. I think that looks pretty good. So let's, now these are the Tamiya I guess Q-tips or cotton buds for lack of a better term. These are great for doing this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to burnish down this tape here to make sure it's holding it good. And then I'm going to tape my other piece of tape here. And let's get this set up there. See, these Tamiya jars have more than one function. And just, so I'm not, again, because it's positioned, I'm not as concerned, as I've taken out the backing paper, I'm not as concerned about putting it on. And again, you'd have to rub it down pretty good to get. So really the purpose of the tape is just to hold it in position while you're pressing down on things. So again, just put that down. Right, like so. And if it covers a little bit of the number, that's fine, because again, you're still going to be able to apply pressure. So I think that looks pretty good. So now the moment of truth. Now we start to actually press down on it. So there's a couple of different ways you can do it. If you look at the so in doing some research for this, I went to the Archer site, Archer Dry Transfers, and they recommend taking a cocktail, or this is actually a cuticle stick, and shaving this down to a bit of a blunt point. I tried that, and I also tried using one of these things, and I think this actually works better. So I'm going to use this on transferring it here. So let's get this going. So this is the moment of truth, everybody. So again, we're putting on dry like with a decal, you once you've glossed the underlying surface, you have time to position the decal, right? With this, you don't. That's why you need to spend all this time measuring it and making sure that it works, or that it's lined up properly, because you won't get a second chance at this. And now what I'm going to do, actually, you know what? I'm gonna get my glasses. 1 second. Okay. So now now that I've got my glasses on, so I can see this up close. I'm just going to start pressing. So you can use a dull pencil too. But if you're using a pencil, the problem is then it'll start to cover. So I'm just using a bit of a circular motion. And again, the way these things work is that there's adhesive on the back side of these things, and the adhesive is activated by pressure. So as soon as it comes into contact with the surface with any amount of pressure, it should start to stick to that surface. Now, I think everybody would remember me raving about the beautiful cast texture on the side of this vehicle. And it is nice, but when it comes to putting a dry transfer on there, that can work against you, because you've got all of these raised ridges. And remember, I didn't put any, so this is just straight on the paint. So I didn't put a gloss coat, like if this was a decal, obviously I put a gloss coat on it. And I'd use that Model Master acrylic one that I love so much, because it doesn't alter the underlying color. But here, one of the nice things about using a dry transfer is that you don't have to use a gloss coat underneath. I mean, if you have one, great, it'll probably stick a little bit better to it, but you don't really need it. So just make sure it's off. You can see. Now you can see this number looks a little different from these other two. So that to me should indicate that we've gotten most of this off, and this is sticking to the vehicle. And as soon as it sticks to the vehicle, as soon as that adhesive activates, that adhesive is stronger than what's holding the stencil to this carrier film here. So once it's on the vehicle, it should hold it in place and lift off of this carrier film. Okay, so I think I've done that one. Let's do this other one here. Okay, so I've finished burnishing the number down with this little Tamiya cotton bud Q-tip, whatever you want to call it. Now, here's the moment of truth. So I'm pretty confident I've burnished everything down. Everything should be good. Of course, I see something at the very last second that makes me nervous. So let's get that piece down. Now, when you're pulling this off, if for some reason you've missed applying pressure to a certain part of one of the numbers here, when you lift this off, that portion is going to come with the carrier film. So in order to give yourself a second chance, make sure that when you pull this off, you're keeping, in my case here, I'm keeping the bottom piece in place so that if I lift this off and I see there's a problem, I can put it back into place and hopefully everything should line up again. Which I had to do on the other side. So I'm fully expecting I may need to do it here. So very carefully, just work the tape off. There we go. Oh. So not so good.
Right side now.
So you can see here that we have, for whatever reason, these numbers. Okay, so that's a done deal. So now, let's see if we can fix this. So move that into place. Okay, so we fixed that part by gently moving it back into place, but we'll come back and fix that a little bit more. Now it's a matter. So this is the part of the hobby that could cause me to start smoking or continue drinking or go back to sniffing glue. So I had the same kind of problem on the other side, although not as severe as this. So it's just a matter of coming in there with this and just kind of working it back, pressing it down. There we go. Not exactly perfect, but we'll come back to that. And then this other piece here. Okay. So in this situation here, the important thing is to get whatever's lifted off on the vehicle. And what I may want to do is go to a slightly softer. So now I'm just trying to push it. There we go. That doesn't look too bad, but we'll come back and fix that. So just using a regular cotton bud here. Okay, so let's peel this off before we have any more mishaps here. So I have to say this is a little more stressful than I was hoping for, but I think we've gotten there. So we've got the number on, but we can see in certain areas the number isn't perfect. And so if we go back to this side of the vehicle here, you can see that I had the same type of problem here on this side here. And I had to do the same type of thing where I had to push it back into place and then work it around. And then you always have the option of touching it up with white paint too. So this ended up looking okay. Now if I go back to here, I've got to start, so this, I would say, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So I would say that this number here, this part of the 2 is kind of come in a little bit. So we want to push it back out ever so slightly. So because this is pure, this is like a dry transfer, I'm going to just gently push it back out. And you can see already it's gotten a little bit better. This is like kind of doing brain surgery. One wrong move and you... And I think actually, I think that's... No, it hasn't. Okay, so I'm just continuing to work. So it doesn't look... So compared to where it was, I think we've managed to recover fairly decently. Now this... There seems to be a bit of a chip here. But that's okay. We can potentially come back and fix that. There's a bit of a chip here. We can come back and fix that. And now this one here, I just want to maybe just, and I might be tempting fate a little bit, but I just want to just push these guys in a bit. Now the thing to remember is that these numbers were painted on via stencils in the field, so they're not going to be perfect anyways. So a decal, water slide decal, tomato, is actually almost too perfect a representation of most markings. So here, I don't know if that's really helping at all, but... So I think if you stand back and look at it, I think that looks okay. So what we could do is we can come back with some white paint and just touch up this. Maybe fix this area up here, just push that a little bit back in. Get this off button, just make sure that's not going to go anywhere. So I don't know if this was me not doing this, not rubbing down enough. I don't know if it was maybe the dry transfers themselves. Maybe maybe they've been sitting around for a bit, and the glue has maybe not as good as it was. It's probably, to be fair, it's probably operator error here. Maybe it's that, it could have something to do with the fact that, again, you can see here it's a fairly textured surface, and I didn't gloss it, so maybe that's why it's, it didn't quite stick into everything, or all the nooks and crannies of the textured surface. Although apparently you can put these on Zimmerit, so I don't think that would be. And one of the advantages of using dry transfers is you don't have to use a gloss; they'll go on any surface, right? So that if you kind of have to gloss these, in my mind, you're kind of defeating the purpose. But those numbers do look painted on. So I think, all things considered, again, similar to issues to what I had with the other side of the vehicle. I think we're good, and I think the numbers line up well. So from an alignment standpoint, I'm pretty happy. So now it's just a matter of maybe touching it up with a little bit of paint. Just those areas that there's a chip, or you can work that into the weathering too, right? You could have, that could be a paint chip, right? Because this was painted on in the field, part of the number could chip as well. So it would be subject to the same natural effects that the rest of the vehicle would be from a chipping standpoint. So if I wanted later on to put a bit of a chip there, I could work that into the weathering as well. So again, you kind of work around these accidents. I like to call them happy accidents, and kind of make it work for you. And again, you're going to know where the faults are, and well, all of you watching are going to know where the faults are on this vehicle. But chances are, somebody else looking at this, there's a good chance they're not going to notice that. Particularly if you work it into the weathering and whatnot, then they're never going to know that there was an issue with getting the dry transfers down. So So I think what we'll do is I might just touch it up with a little bit of white paint and then hit it with a combination of the semi-gloss and the flat, again a 50-50 ratio, just to seal it so that to ensure that there aren't any further mishaps when I start doing the weathering on it. And again, if I look at the results I had on this side, you know, this barrier that I put on here, the sealing coat that I put on here worked very well, and I had absolutely no issues getting weathering on top of this. So streaking and a little bit of oil paints and the washes and whatnot. So it worked out. It worked out fine. And again, I had the same. I had to actually touch up a few areas with paint too. So looks like that was consistent on this side as well. So I'm gonna go have a cigarette now. Or no, I won't. But I'll get. I'll seal this. I'll touch it up off camera, seal it, and then we'll get back to doing some streaking maybe on the front of the vehicle while this dries on the side. Okay, so I've managed to fix the number. Just touched it up with paint a little bit. So now I'm going to seal it. So what I've done is I've taken a mix of 50% Tamiya flat XFA6 and 50% semi-gloss X35. Mixed it with almost equal parts thinner and spraying it at about 15 psi, and I'm just going to give some just light coats, just to seal it, just to protect it from all the weathering we're going to do on this. Going forward. There we go. So that's done. Give it one last quick pass. Now I'm just blowing air on it to make sure it dries. Looks good. So what we'll do is when we start doing the weathering and the streaking, the nice thing about armored vehicles is that if you have a bit of a mishap somewhere, you know, you can work it into some of the weathering. So that's what we'll do here, just to make sure. I mean, it looks pretty happy with the recovery on the numbers, but we'll add some strategic streaking and maybe a little bit of chipping just to kind of make sure that gets fixed up. But I think we're back in business. So now what we'll do is we'll just do just go over a little bit of streaking and pin washes on the front of the vehicle here, and we'll look at wrapping it up. Okay, so now for the pin washes, what I've done is I've taken some of the dark wash here and thinned it a little bit with the odorless thinners, probably a ratio of about 50-50. And what I just start doing is now we're working on, so we just sealed this side here, so I'm going to let that set for at least 24 hours before I do anything to it. Don't want any more excitement there than we need, and I'm just going to, but I'll work on doing the pin washes here. And again, just similar to what we did on the Sherman, touching, we've got some nice panel lines here, we've got some weld seams in here, you got this nice fender spring, I've got some nice detail, weld detail here for these armored louver covers, or I don't know if they're louver covers, but armored covers call them. Some nice hatch detail or latch detail here. And again, it's not worrying about being terribly precise on things. Get some in there. So I'm just gonna put this on, let it conform around, maybe thin that, let's add a little bit of color to that. Like Dave said previously, these measurements are there's a lot of ish in these measurements. There we go. That looks better. Just get it around the bolt detail. like so. And there, that nice weld along the bottom. So we've already done kind of this side. Go back and touch these up. That looks pretty good. Now we did here, but we haven't done this side, so let's touch that. Nice big bolt there. Take all kinds of wash detail up here too. Here as well, right there, into the hooks here. Now, actually, that's a credit. One of our viewers pointed out that there's a bit of there's a slight mold seam here. I think that was I think that was Will. Will pointed that out. So I had a good look back at it, and yeah, there was. So I've gone back and I've sanded some of this back, so I can fix that. So again, if you have a little bit of seam line that you catch after the fact, not a disaster. You can certainly go back in and fix that. So I'll just sand that and scrape that and maybe touch that up a little bit with some paint. Gonna get up here again. There's so much detail on this vehicle. These nice torch cut plate here. These nice, beautiful. Normally on a vehicle, I would go through. I would have to enhance this with an X-Acto knife, like put some liquid cement on it, soften the plastic, and then go after it with an X-Acto knife to kind of increase it. But I didn't have to do any of that on this vehicle. It's beautiful stuff. And again, your wash is going to get in there. It's not. You can come back and dry that up after the fact. Let's put in here on the gun this nice seam here. And then what I do is I'll let it dry, and then come back at it with a brush moistened with thinner, or you can use these handy dandy makeup sponges and just kind of wipe things off. And you can come back. I've come back as late as like a day later, 24 hours. I won't leave it much more than 24 hours. Actually, I'd really try and get it off within about 30 minutes of applying it. I might hit this with a hairdryer to accelerate it for the sake of filming here, but you need to see there's so much nice detail on this. It's just begging to be exposed and enhanced by way of a wash. Now, look, the wash is pretty thick in here, but again, we'll come back at it and take some of that off. You can do some on some of the running gear here. So I did the other side. This side I haven't done yet. So again, just touch it. Maybe in there, doesn't really need much in there. So again, on these sprockets here, nice main drive sprockets, nice bolt detail there. It's a nice thing about the Panzer IV chassis is you've got, actually, pretty much on all vehicles, drive sprocket, there's so much nice bolt details. It's just begging to come out. There we go, look at that. Get that in the light a little bit better. It's a little heavy-handed, but again, we'll come back and clean this up with either the sponge or a moist brush. Right. Now, these road wheels. Now these are steel, and the reason why the first four are steel on this vehicle is because of the weight of the gun. The rubber wasn't able to stand up to it, and I think also that there may have been some shortages late in the war for Germany with rubber. But you don't have to be too precise with these, because again, you're going to cover these up in a lot of mud. So to be honest with you, a lot of this is probably going to get hidden, but just like the pre-shading we did on the primer, it's another layer in the overall effect you're trying to build up for the vehicle. Now on that, I was having a conversation last night with a good friend of mine, Dave Price, and he was asking if I thought that any of the pre-shading I did showed through. And my initial reaction was not really. But after looking at this a little bit more, and I don't know if it's, if I go back to the front of the vehicle here. So we had some pre-shading down here. So I don't know if this, I think this is more the effect of the darker color when we did the modulation, more than it is the pre-shading. And I don't think any of the streaking came through on the sides here. So all the streaking you see here is by virtue of the streaking I did on this over the paint. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know that. I think my initial thought was a definite no. It didn't come through. I'll get some of this bolt detail back here. But if they're looking at it, it's kind of hard to say. If I was pressed for time and I had to start selectively dumping some of the weathering techniques that I use, I think the pre-shading would be the first to go. Like I said, especially on a multicolored camel. Sorry, let me get this in the light a little bit better so you can see. So I'm just touching detail here. Now, some of you might be asking, says, well, hey, there's more detail back here. Why aren't you getting at that? And maybe I will go back after the fact. But again, you got to think about on the finished vehicle, are you going to see what's in here when the road wheels are in place, and chances are you're not going to see very much. Give these guys some attention. But definitely when we start applying the mud and the weathering, the pigments and whatnot, these will come off and we'll get at those things underneath. But again, because this is something that, I don't know how much of this you're really going to see under all of that other pigments and whatnot. So again, this might, if I have to start dropping things for the sake of time, that might be the, right after the pre-shading, this might be the second. Then doing it on the running gear, if you're going to muddy it up, that is. If you're going to go light on the weathering, then absolutely do the, I'll take the sprocket off. There's some nice bolt detail. But again, you won't see it with the sprocket on. So if you don't see it, you'll know it's there, but, is it really worth doing? And I'm as guilty of that as anybody. I'll spend time, if there's any amount of detail on the inside of the vehicle, even though I'm going to close it up, I'll spend time painting it and weathering it and whatnot. I'll know it's there. Nobody else will. So we'll let that dry and just come back at it and clean it up with either a moist brush or the sponge, and I'll show you how to do that. And then we'll do some streaking, and we'll call it an episode. Okay, so I've accelerated the drying of the wash that we put in with a hair dryer. So now what I'm going to start doing is we'll try the sponge technique first, just to see if we can start to pull off. And so you can see as I just, and again when you're pulling it up, pull it down in the direction of rain. You can see that creates a nice effect. With the gun here. That looks pretty good. Up here. That looks pretty good. The nice thing about using the sponge is that it leaves enough of the wash. So you can see here, you can get nice detail, kind of that torch cut, and the weld seams kind of start to pop now. Same thing here. Get some of that out there. Work around that. You can see it kind of creates a bit of a streaking effect. And these sponges, I stole this from Carolyn, but you can find them at drugstores, or you can just steal them from your significant other, like I do. I wonder if when Dave went into the drugstore to pick up that hairspray there, that Tresemme he was using on the lamppost, if he got the same type of look I got from the cashier when I bought my hairspray. There we go, just in here a bit. Now there it's a little bit hard to get because of the tow cable, so well, it's coming off good. So it's funny, the more I use the sponge, the more I like using the sponge. Because it does leave I think it looks pretty good. So I might have to come in here with a moist brush to clean up some of the detail on that tread plate, but otherwise, now if we do these things here, so this should be dead simple. So look how easy that comes off. So I think this does a good job in getting most of the wash off the areas that you don't want it on. But again, you do have the ability to go back in and target certain areas that you can't get at with a paintbrush. And that works pretty good. I mean, that's a nice, look how easy that is. And again, I mean, you can afford to take some shortcuts here because you're going to throw all kinds of pigment and mud and splashes and grease stains and whatnot on this. So, you know, a lot of this stuff is going to get covered. That's a nice thing about armored models. I think maybe some of the aircraft modelers look down on the armored modelers because, you know, it's much more of a forgiving medium, and you know, I've done some aircraft models in the past, and I consider myself probably more an armor modeler than anything else, but I'd have to agree with them. Not that I look down, obviously I don't look down on things because there's a lot of thought and art and skill that goes into weathering something like this, but I'll push that back. But yeah, you're right. I mean, this number here, I mean, I go back to the number here. I mean, you can see that the 2 is there, but a nice, you know, and I might go back and try and fix that up a little bit off camera. But, you know, worst case, you know, put a nice streak through there or put a nice chip through there, right? And at the end of it, nobody, well, again, all of you are going to know, but so if you do end up judging my model at a show, be gentle, please. But you know, you can work a scratch or a streak or splatter or something in there that would help cover up that mistake. And generally speaking, nobody would be the wiser. So let's do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple of streaks. We'll focus on the front here, but we'll put a couple of streaks, and that'll be it for this episode. Okay, so now I'm using the streaking grime for dark yellow vehicles from this is from AK, but again, I think MiG has the identical color, and I've already applied a couple of streaks here, so I'm just going to continue with a fine brush, and again, it doesn't have to be terribly precise. Mark that down, maybe another one in here, another one down in here, and then we can start working on just to give a little, and very random. Now, if you remember, there's the 3 holes here. We're going to have some spare tracks go there. And we're also going to have some spare tracks on the front here, which I may... now, the nice thing about going back to these Kaizen tracks, there's extras. And the detail on the tracks that you get from Kaizen are a little bit better than what you get, the one-piece section that you get out of the kit. So I may end up using some of those in here and dropping those in. Get back to the streaking, just... And again, you can see, I'm not terribly... My brushwork isn't terribly fine. And maybe a little bit on the mantlet here. Gun I might do just a couple, just like that. Maybe a few here. Don't ignore the sides of this. I don't know if this is the driver. And maybe a couple here on that side. Okay, so now let's go and look at doing some of the rain streaks. And the reason why, so this is kind of a medium brown color. This is a lighter color, so I think this will stand, like you won't see this very much on the Panzer yellow parts, but this will stand up fairly well on the red, brown, and the greens, as you can see here. Right, so I think the colors that you choose will ultimately depend on, obviously, the color of the tag, and you can tell here. I mean, they kind of tell you, right? The nice thing about these guys, they make it easy for you. This is for dark yellow. I mean, you can use it on any vehicle you want, but I guess it's envisioned to go on dark yellow vehicles. So let's make sure this is mixed up good. Yeah, perfect. I'm shaking it vigorously off camera. So now I'll just work in, and you may want to focus this on some of the lighter areas. Just to give it some variation. Right here, here, here. A little bit here, here, here. So just paint it on. Again, if I see, I've watched demonstrations online of Meg himself doing this, and he's a lot finer. He's not as clumsy with the brush strokes as I am, but I think you get to the same spot because of the way you're blending them in. Okay, so we'll let that dry. I might hit that with a hairdryer off camera, and then we'll blend it. And I think we'll call it a day. Okay. So I've hit it with the hairdryer just to dry it out, and again, you just want to get to a point where, if I touch it, nothing happens. Like that, a bit of build up there. So what I'm going to do is, I have a few brushes I like to use for this. There's a kind of a feathered streaking brush, but I find that only works on wide surfaces, so I don't typically use that, but I do have this round brush here that I've had, and you can see it's really seen a lot of wear and tear. So I have some odorless thinner here, so I just damp it a bit, get most of it off, and then I just start blending it. And you can see that it starts to, and I just go in an up and down motion. And you're just kind of working these in. Try to get that. I'll get that light around a little bit here, maybe. You're just working it up and down. So you can see that brown streaking that we had for the pen. It works at nice. And you can see the cast texture, how it's starting to capture some of this, right? Which is what I was hoping to see as well. Let's kind of work this in. And all this is really just a blending exercise. Now there's a nice kind of rain streak there. I might want to leave that in place. I'm not going to touch that one too much more, but I'm just going to work just blending this in here. Just work some streaks in. Again, this nice sloping front here with all kinds of dirt and mud and whatnot would accumulate. And you can just see how that cast texture just captures it so nicely. And just kind of work it in. Just work it up a bit. There we go. Maybe the sponge comes in handy again. So you see that's a nice streaked effect. Pretty happy with that. Work this one in a little bit more. Work down into the front glacis plate here. Maybe start working these mud guards a little bit. Just work it up and down. And again, if you're not happy with something, just load your brush up with thinner and you can pull everything off. And after doing this, if you're not happy with the results or you feel that you've taken off more than you wanted, you can simply just go over it again, apply more streaking or more streaks on it, and then go back over it. Let it, you have to let this dry, otherwise if you do it too soon, you're pulling everything off. You see how that works in nice. Okay, so I'm just continuing to work in these, blend in these streaks. Some of them I'm going to leave a little bit heavier, some I'm going to work in. So that one, I kind of like that one coming in from that bolt. I'm going to try and work that one up a little bit. Some in here. Sometimes in the hard to reach areas, maybe just a bit of a stippling motion just to spread things around. Leave that one there, that's a nice one. That's a nice streak, I say. So you're just kind of pulling it down. Just trying to feather it in. So you can see, again, the streaks are fairly clumsy compared to what some other folks do, but, the effect, then you've got a nice long streak here, a nice rain streak here. It's kind of been blended in. I think that looks pretty good. Pretty happy with that. So very easy to do. Let's pick up a little bit more of this thinner there. And you can see the brush is barely moist with thinner. This is on the paper here. It's almost like dry brushing. You're almost dry brushing with thinner, as it were. And it's just enough to get the product moving around. And the reason why you let it dry is because when it's dry, you have a little bit more control over it. All right, it doesn't move as around as freely, and it fights to stay on the vehicle a little bit more. And that works for you in terms of getting a nice feathered effect. It's just a lot easier to control. If you go after it when it's wet, you're just going to make a big puddled mess. This one gives you a lot more control. Get this one under here, just move it up and down. There you go, I'm just moving it around, just pulling that down a bit. There we go.
They tested everything. Everything that was out of your body. Well,
I'm gonna have to edit some of this, Robert.
I keep.
Keep it all real. Keep it real.
Of course.
In case you can use it at a later date. There we go. So just keep working in the streaking just till you get it to where you're happy. And again, you can always come back and add more. But I think that looks pretty good. Maybe just work a little bit more on the gun. You can't forget to streak the barrels. This is a fairly obvious example because the barrel on this vehicle is so pronounced. But even if you're working on a Panther or a Tiger, a long 88 barrel in there, make sure you get some streaking on that too, because it would have happened, right? It's would have been subjected to the same elements that the rest of the vehicle is. So that looks pretty good. Oh, I forgot on the side here. Is there anything No, that's good there. So I think we're good. So what I might want to, I just kind of talk about, so if I wanted to do a more pronounced streak, let's say right here, I might put just a touch of oil paint. That's all you need. And then the same thing. Just feather that in. And that gives you even more control. And you just keep working it. Now I've put this on some cardboard to leach out the linseed oil so that you have more concentrated paint, and the linseed oil tends to make things a little bit glossy, which you may not necessarily want, so I just keep working it in. And you can see you got a nice fine streak. Darker color, and again you can use any color oil paint. So again, one of these strategic streaks is probably going to go somewhere here on these numbers. Clean it up. That's one of the nice things about building armor vehicles, is that you have that ability. So I think that kind of concludes. So again, going back to what we have here, the same paints and mixtures and colors and whatnot, the rain marks, the streaking grime for dark yellow, and the same, what is this, shadow brown Abteilung 015. So I'll continue to do that around the rest of the vehicle, the other vertical surfaces, and next time we'll get into pigments and weathering and done. So thanks for hanging there with me. Thanks for hanging in there with the slight mishap with the dry transfers. I mean, they are a great way of getting markings onto the vehicle. Again, maybe this is probably operator error on my part, so don't let my experience scare you off. I think for something like this, particularly where you have a textured surface, and whether it was the Tamiya decals or any other decals, I would have been a little bit nervous about putting that on there to get everything to sink in. But I think at the end of the day, even though there was some nerve-wracking moments there, I'm pretty pleased. These things really look painted on, and with a little bit of weathering and blending into the rest of the vehicle, I think they'll look absolutely fantastic. So next time we'll start doing some weathering on the chassis, the track. Again, it's a lot of the same things you guys saw with the Sherman, so we're not going to go into as much detail as you did with the Sherman. And we may do a couple of shorter episodes on maybe some of the side skirts, doing some chipping. Again, the intent is to put some that look like they're from other vehicles, so I'll probably do a quick short tutorial on that as well. But I think we're close to crossing the finish line on this here, so I want to thank everybody for hanging in there with me, and look forward to seeing you guys next time.